Tracy Martin.
Just to take a short call, I happened to sit in on the Select Committee when the negotiators came to brief the Select Committee on the workings of the Korean Free Trade Agreement, which the Tariff Free Trade Agreement between New Zealand and the Republic of Korea Amendment Bill will enable. And I want to stand and support Fletcher Tabato's contribution with regard to New Zealand First position. And I acknowledge the contribution by Mr. Shearer. It is a trade agreement, and it comes down to what you are prepared to trade off to gain access to a market. And what was most interesting to me when the negotiators were there giving us a briefing at that Select Committee, I asked them a very direct question. I asked them what had Korea asked for? Because as Mr. Shearer just pointed out, there's an awful lot of bits and pieces that, New Zealand will see go into the South Korean markets. But as Mr. Shearer put a figure of 4-point-something million compared to 200 and something million for New Zealand. I asked the negotiators, what was it that Korea asked for? Seeing as they got virtually nothing else, nothing, compared to what New Zealand had been able to gain. And the single thing they asked for was an ISDS clause. Now you have to ask yourself, sir, why would a nation where we're 41st in their list of trading partners, we are not important to them necessarily, no matter how important they might be to us, and they ask for one single thing. They ask for an ISDS clause. And then they give us all these other little bits and pieces. Well, how can other members of this parliament stand and say that this bill, which enacts that act, has no effect? That trade agreement would have no effect when Korea obviously sees it as vitally important. It's the single thing they asked for. And I understand completely why the Labour Party stands up to support this agreement, because they could not argue not to. They placed an ISDS clause inside the China Free Trade Agreement, and that agreement will be updated upon the application of this one. Upon the passing of the bill and the application of the Korean Free Trade Agreement, the China Free Trade Agreement will then be updated. And while we have had no problems at this stage with the ISDS clause inside the China Free Trade Agreement, now this one updates it. It updates the China agreement under the most favoured nation status. So those things are important. Those are the reasons why this is what New Zealand First is standing for. And the fact that while Mr. Reti may say that 356 cases have been taken to international clauses under the ISDS, and only, we're not sure where they get their numbers from, but only 25% were won by the people taking those cases, how much money was spent defending them? How much money was spent by nations defending themselves and their own laws and their ability to make their own laws in their own nations, let alone whether they win or not? How much did it cost? Because that is the point, Mr. Chair. That is the point. That is why New Zealand First will not support this bill. We will not support a bill that enacts a trade agreement that has an ISDS clause. The fact that the Labour Party stands and supports such a bill while at the same time carrying placards up and down streets against the TPPA boggles the mind. How is that possible? How can the Labour Party stand and say they are against one thing because of an ISDS, and at the same time support this bill that will enact the Korean Free Trade Agreement and will update the China Free Trade Agreement? So I hope, Mr. Chair, that in this contribution I have made it very clear why New Zealand First will stand against this bill, because what you trade off is just as important as what you trade for, Mr. Jamie Lee Ross. It's a basic premise of accounting. It's the basic premise of accounting. What are you giving away to get in order for what you gain? And from our perspective, this government, supported by the Labour Party, is actually giving away more than New Zealand can afford in the future for a few crumbs from Korea and for China. Kia ora.
I call Claire Curran.
Thank you,